Hi everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to onboard FTDv, the Firewall Threat Defense Virtual Appliance version 7.3.0 to Cloud FMC, our Cloud Firewall Management Center in Cisco Defense Orchestrator, CDO in the cloud. This is the cloud management platform that Cisco has to manage multiple firewall threat defense devices across your on-prem or even cloud environment. Now let's hop over to take a look at how my setup will look like. Okay, for this tutorial, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to have a two-tier firewall. I just have a FTDv installed in my KVM environment in the cloud. I actually have a public IP address assigned to the outside interface. This is where we will be using to communicate with Cloud FMC or CDO. Right, so we'll be using the outside management data interface to onboard our FTDv into Cloud FMC. Right, the thing that you need to take note for the initial communication, you need to uh, 05 or port 8305 to communicate between CDO and your on-prem FMC. We'll also configure the management IP for the FTD, but for this tutorial, we'll not be using this management interface. I might do a video to show you how to change the management of the FTDv from the management data interface, right, to the management access or the management interface. So there's a bit of nuances when you look at the manual. There's a management data interface, and then there's a management interface or management access. So they actually means different things, but we'll not drill into that in this tutorial. Okay, but just take note, this setup is pretty straightforward. It consists of two main steps. One is configuring the command line in FTDv, and next is configuring the onboarding in CDO itself. Now let's hop over to the FTD console or command line. So I've freshly installed a new FTDv, right? I'll show you how it looks like to configure FTD, formerly known as Firepower, from the start, right? So when you first boot up, the default username is admin. The password is capital A D M I N 123. Okay, once you log in, it'll prompt you to accept the end user license agreement, read through them, accept the terms and conditions, and then key in a new password. Okay, when you first boot up and log in, you'll be prompted to configure the management interface, right? So you can look at that description. It will prompt you. You must configure the network to continue. Configure at least one IPv4 or v6 unless managing via data interface, right? So we will be configuring management data interface, right? But we can still go ahead and configure the management IP, right, for future use, for other purposes. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue to do that. You can actually skip this step completely if you want to just manage your FTDv using the outside interface that we're gonna configure later, right? But just to go through a standard wizard, we're gonna configure IPv4. It will be a manual IP address configuration. The IP address I've specified earlier, 129.166, and then 255.255.255.0. You could enter, and then the default gateway dot 66, right? Okay, give it a name. We'll use the default DNS, which is the umbrella DNS IP addresses. Then we will complete this. Right after the configuration, if you have a network HTTP proxy, you will need to do the HTTP proxy configuration. Since I don't, right, we'll not do that. And more importantly, when you reach the step that says manage device locally, you're going to select no, as we will not be using FDM when we onboard the FTD to Cloud FMC. So we will not have the local manager, so just enter no. Right, it will save the configuration. Then next, it should prompt you for the firewall mode. It takes a short while for the configuration to apply. Okay, then like I mentioned, it will prompt you on what firewall mode you want to configure the FTD. So for normal firewall mode, it is routed, right? You could just press enter as well, but just to show you, we're choosing routed. Transparent is more for inline inspection IPS IDS function, but normal firewall just choose routed, which allows you to route the traffic uh, through the firewall across the different interfaces as well. Okay, once the configuration is done, it'll give you some instruction on if you're going to onboard the FTD to a firewall management center. What are the commands that you need to uh, enter, right? It's similar to the Cloud FMC, so but we don't use any of these commands. But if you're planning to manage the FTD using an on-prem FMC, those instructions are helpful. So that's what we need to do on the initial configuration wizard. Next, we're going to configure the outside interface as our management data interface. So we will issue the command configure network management data interface, right? So if it's the first time that you're configuring the management data interface, you can just hit enter, right? It will walk you through the configuration with from a guided mode perspective, right? So enter the data interface to use for management. This is the actual interface that you want to configure. So this is our gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So take note of the spelling and the port, right? We'll give the name of this interface as outside because it's going to be our outside interface. For IP address, we will use manual, right? If your ISP provide your public IP address through a DHCP, you can select DHCP. Okay, now we will add our IP address. Then followed by the subnet mask. And then the default gateway. Okay, it will prompt you what is the DNS you want to use. We're going to use back the umbrella DNS IP addresses. Okay, and then it will save the configuration. Give it a couple of seconds for it to apply. Okay, the configuration is done. Next, let's do a quick check of our configuration by issuing the command show network. It will give you the basic information on the system, right? The host name, the DNS that is used, DNS enabled from the router. One thing, like I mentioned, the communication port, management port is 8304. This is by default, and I don't believe you can change that. The default route is taking the configuration from the management data interface. Okay. Now we have also configured the management IP. You'll notice that the default gateway for the management IP is no longer shown here because now we're using the data interface instead of the actual management interface, right? So, and then this is where we have our IP addresses configured for our outside gigabit 0/0 interface. Okay, once that's done, you can do a quick validation, right? Let's try and ping to the external network. You can see that it is successful, right? With exclamation mark means that it's success, right? And then we can also check whether the DNS is working because you will need that to onboard FTD to Cloud FMC, right? You can see that it is successful 100%. So we can now reach the external internet as well as using domain name, right, to resolve the IP addresses. So that's good. Next, what we're going to do is to hop over to the CDO interface. So let's go over there. Okay, so I've already logged into my CDO, right, Cisco Defense Orchestrator. You can see from the dashboard, I have a couple of machines that I've already onboarded in my other testing. But once you reach the screen, what you want to do is to hop over to onboard right here and then just click on it. Okay, as you can see, there's a lot of development on CDO. We can now manage ASA, FTD, and a lot of other cloud native firewall as well. But for this tutorial, we'll basically be using the or be selecting the device type FTD, right? So if you have seen my previous tutorial on onboarding FDM, you will see that, for this tutorial, we are going to use FTD here, right? Which is the recommended way of onboarding FTD devices. Now, if you are new to the Cisco Defense Orchestrator, if you have not turned on FDM, you might not be able to see the FDM option. Okay, just take note of that. So there's nuances between FTD and FDM, so do be mindful. So we're gonna use FTD, which will onboard our solution to the Firewall Management Center in CDO, right? Which I refer to as the Cloud FMC as well. So we'll be using CI registration key. So click on that. Okay. Take note that this name is different from the host name that you configure on the system. This name is used to identify the device in Cloud FMC or CDO. Now select a default access control policy. So we're going to use that. Now you can manually create a policy for this particular FTD as well, but we're not going to do it here. So take note over here, depending on whether you're onboarding a physical device or a virtual device, you have to select that over here. So we're gonna use for my setup is virtual device, right, and I am using the FTDv 10 here for call. Okay, we'll not go through the license application for this tutorial, so adding the tier is sufficient, right, for us to proceed. Then click next. Okay, this is the important part, right? Make sure to copy and save your CLI key below, right? This is what you will use and need to configure in the FTD, right? So click next, and then you can just click go to inventory to go back to the inventory screen. Okay, so you can see right now it is trying to onboard the device, right? So the process has started, is listening for, the FTD to call home or to communicate to CDO. Now let's head back over to the console. So all we need to do now is just to paste in the CLI registration key. Okay, once that's done, you will see that you'll get this prompt, right? Please make note of key register as this is required while adding devices in FMC. So for production environment, you might want to save this key somewhere, right? Recommended to save it somewhere safe. Okay, so that's all you need to do on the FTD. So the configuration parts are all done. I will run through some of the basic checks later, but let's hop back to the CDO and look at what happens in the CDO. So once you've done that, right, and you do a refresh with this refresh icon over here, you'll see that the command here has changed from the previous onboarding command to registration in progress. So when you see this, it means that the communication between CDO and FTD has happened, right? They have sort of connected, right? And if we go into workflow here, you can see that the first part here, right, the FTC onboarding machine is done, right? So when you see this, it's good news, right? You should see this like almost instantaneously, or 30 seconds to a minute max, right? If you don't see this, something is wrong with your configuration. You need to go back and troubleshoot it or look at the manual or contact tech support, right? So this part should be quite straightforward. Now, the second part, which is, getting the configurations synchronized, it can take quite a bit of time, right? Depending on what is being updated, right, and the configuration. So we'll wait for that to finish. But the important thing is we want to see that this part, the initial onboarding is done, right? That tells us the communication is established. Okay. And let's head back to the FTDv. No, actually before that, let's just go back to the inventory. Okay. And then if we click on this, you can see that the command here will change, right, as the onboarding progresses. You can see that it has our secure tunnel or SF tunnel is being established. So that means that they have created a secure tunnel between the CDO and FTD, and the next step is to discover what are the configurations from the devices, and then onboard all the necessary device configurations into Cloud FMC or FMC in CDO, right? But if we do a refresh now, we can see that it has gone online, right? And deployment is in progress and it is in a syncing state, right? The synchronization state might take some time, so we're gonna head over to the command line. So there are a couple of commands that we can use on the command line to do some quick verification. So the first one that we can use is FFT or SF tunnel status brief, right? You can use a brief just to do a quick check. So the connection should be quite fast, right? You will see, the connection happening, right? What you want to see is that the registration has completed, right? Peer channels A and B is connected, and then you can see that the IP connection to the peer is successful, right? With the timestamp, and then the heartbeat and receive, right? So once you see this, it means that the FTD has enrolled into FMC in CDO, and the synchronization is taking place. Now, this is a good sign. It shows that the onboarding is successful. Now, if you see other errors, that's when you will need to troubleshoot, right? And in a lot of cases, you might need to open a tech support ticket to check what is actually happening. But if you have followed the step closely, right, and if you read the manual for all the prerequisite, then this step should be straightforward and it shouldn't give you much problem. Okay, we will now then wait for the synchronization to complete. Let's just do a quick refresh to see where we are. Okay, so we have now put in the model registration key. And the good news is that once the basic synchronization is done, right, you can see that you can actually start to check the various configuration, right? But one thing I always recommend, if you are onboarding for the first time, be patient, let the synchronization completes, right? You should wait until the status becomes sync, right? The status here becomes sync or not sync, right? It's better that way, right? But one thing that uh, you should be okay if you see that the status is online, right? So it takes some time to synchronize for the status to update as well, since it's in the cloud. So do be patient, right, and let it finish. Don't rush and try and change things while the synchronization is happening. We'll pause the video and come back when the synchronization completes. Okay, now once the synchronization complete, you will see that your device configuration is up to date, right? If we do a refresh, you can see that the synchronization is done. Now, if we go to device overview, we can see that the device device management status is connected. Status of the health is normal, right? So if we go to interfaces, you can see that we default the interfaces is being added. Now there are still a few configuration that we need to do to get the FTD to the basic operational state. But do take note, right? When you onboard this FTD into FMC in the cloud or in Defense Orchestrator, the configuration will be wiped out, right? So do take note of that. So you want to make sure that you have, if you are migrating, right, FTD or FDM into FMC, right, do take note of that. Now, if you're migrating FMC from an on-prem environment to the cloud environment, is a different ball game altogether, right? That the configurations is very, very different, right? But if you are starting afresh like me, right, onboarding a new FTD, then it's not an issue. Okay, so that's all for today's tutorial. All right, quick recap. Now we have configured the FTD, right, with the outside management interface that we have mentioned, and then we have used the command line registration key to onboard the cloud, the FTD into the FMC in CDO or the cloud FMC. Okay, so that's all for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.